Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for being here. We're going to officially start in just a couple of minutes. We want to give everyone just a little bit more time to join us. We've had quite a fantastic response actually to the webinar today. So we're maybe going to give it another couple of minutes and then we'll kick off. In the meantime, I can see that we have a few members of your community from your district joining us live. So I'm going to unmute them in just a second. If you give me a second here. All right, Seth, I've unmuted you now if you'd like to say a few words before we begin.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm just happy to have this opportunity to expand on what we're doing in the district and just welcome you to take in, ask questions. As we do this together, I truly want this to be a partnership between Mount Vernon and our families that we support. So thank you very much for being here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Seth. So Seth is going to be with us throughout this presentation as well, in case you have any questions for him. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. If you could just give me a second. All right. All right. Okay. And I can see we have a solid number of people joining us live. I might just give it, I think, one more minute. And then we're going to kick things off. While we wait, I will just say that we have both our chat and our Q&A function enabled during this presentation. This is for all of you joining us live. We will be sharing a recording of this with you as well, so you will be able to watch it later. But if you are joining us live, if you do have any questions, if you have any comments, sort of any insights that you would like to share with us as I share the content today, then please feel free to jump in there, either inside the chat or the Q&A, and let us know. There will be a couple of moments throughout this presentation when I will invite you to participate as well. I hope you'll take that opportunity. And one other thing I should say as we sort of slowly kick off here, the theme today obviously is family online safety, children's online safety, and their digital well-being. We're going to be talking about age-appropriate technology use, what parents need to know about that. We're going to talk about safe versus risky online communication. Because I will be touching on themes like predator behavior online, grooming as well. Some of the themes that I will be talking about are going to be adult themes. We always like to encourage families to have their students join in these conversations as well. So I will let you sort of decide if you were planning on sharing this presentation with your student, with your child, depending on sort of the age appropriateness of these themes relative to your child's age, their maturity level as well. You might sort of want to think about that just before we launch into our content. So thank you again for being here. I want to thank Seth for partnering with us on delivering this webinar to you, to the whole Mount Vernon community. My name is Theodora. I'm the Director of Wellbeing and Parent Advocacy, and I'm really thrilled to be here with you. We are going to be talking about some pretty, I would say, heavy themes, perhaps some of the heaviest, the most serious that we discuss when it comes to children's online safety. But I'm still very happy to have this opportunity to talk to you about this because it is really, really important. There are a lot of different things that we can do to try and make our children's experiences online more safe and to really try and strengthen that relationship with our children. It's one of the greatest protective factors when it comes to their safe experiences online. My background is in psychology, so I have a master's degree in clinical psychology. I'm also a certified digital wellness educator. So I really come to this topic of children's online safety from that perspective of psychology, of child development, of that relationship between the parent and the child. And so you'll see throughout this presentation, there are going to be a few different moments where I'll be sharing some practical, many in fact, practical tips and tools for you. These are things that are grounded in research. They're really grounded in healthy child development. And again, in our ability, our capacity, and the opportunities that we have to build those healthy relationships with our children to really build that trust. Like I said, that's one of the most important protective factors when it comes to them being safe online, being responsible as well, ultimately knowing how to take care of themselves as well. I've been in the digital wellness space for about a decade now. I've definitely seen the conversation around children's online safety shift. When I first started, people didn't really know what we meant when we said digital well-being. Children's online safety was just sort of starting to be explored. But one of the biggest differences I've seen is the huge amount of interest that we have from school districts in the US, but schools around the world as well, to really bring in this kind of education to their families, really bring the families on as partners in this sort of adventure that we call our online lives. Speaking of the school district bringing this kind of information and education, these types of tools for you and to you, there are a couple of tools specifically that your school district is making available to you to really help you succeed in this. One is your district's online safety hub, and the other one is the custodial parental control app. And I know that we've had a really fantastic uptake at your district when it comes to these parental controls, which is fantastic. This is the QR code that you can use to access your district's online safety hub. You can see a little screenshot of it there on the right-hand side. We have lots of really fantastic articles there for you, guides, videos, on-demand webinars, app and game reviews, and many, many other resources. I will be sort of referencing the online safety hub as I go through this presentation with you today. And then for those of you who haven't downloaded and activated the custodial parental control tool yet, you can do that from inside the hub as well. So if you go onto that landing page and you just scroll down a little bit, you will see a section there that is dedicated to custodial. And that's where with one click, you'll be able to initiate that process of setting up an account for yourself. It's pretty easy and straightforward. Although if you do need any help, you can get some help from inside the hub as well. To help you set that up for yourself and for your child as well. So in terms of our agenda for today, our presentation is going to be about 30 to 35 minutes long, I would say. And there are three sort of key areas here that I would like to cover. I'd like to do a little bit of exploratory work, if you will, to begin with, look at the digital landscape for today's youth. After that, I want to move into what we think about when we say age-appropriate technology use, and what are some of the tech readiness skills that you really want to keep front of mind as you make decisions around your child using their first tablet, first smartphone, starting up on social media, gaming, whatever sort of phase of technological development, if you will, your child is in. And then finally focusing on that sort of aspect of risky communication online, looking a little bit more closely at how grooming develops online. It's a process, and it's really important and really useful for you to understand what that looks like, what some of the risks and vulnerabilities are for children who are perhaps more likely to encounter this type of risk online. What are a few concrete examples of how this might happen in different virtual spaces? And then finally moving again into that place of sort of practicalities. What are some of the actual things that you can do in order to support your child's online safety? We will have that sort of practical component throughout this presentation at all three of these different moments. I want to make sure to share not just insights with you, not just sort of statistics, but really also practical things that you can actually do, really shift your focus onto, at times, some pretty sort of basic things that you're probably already doing with your child. But it's, I think, really interesting to think about those in light of this theme that we're talking about today. And again, re-emphasize how even doing these small things can be incredibly important in the long run, because it will build that trust in your relationship with your child, build your confidence and theirs as well, and make sure that they're a lot more likely to reach out to you if something bad does happen, or if they suspect that something bad will happen. That's one of the biggest things we're still trying to work on when it comes to making children safer online. We want to really encourage them to speak up and to share with us when something bad happens online. The more they're able to do that, the more we're able to help them, and of course, the more we're then going to be able to reduce the incidences of things like risky communication happening on these various apps and platforms that children use so often. Speaking of them using them so often, one of the most really important reasons for us to come together and talk about really any of these online safety risks that children encounter is that, depending on the research you look at, anywhere between sort of 20 to 50% of teens today say that they're online almost constantly. So they're spending most of their waking hours in some cases in these virtual spaces. And on the one hand, they're facing the many benefits that they can get from being disconnected to technology. But they are also then likely to encounter some of these digital risks that we see, and some of the distractions that they encounter throughout the day as well. As I mentioned earlier, that school-family partnership is incredibly important. Your district is already taking the steps that they can in order to make sure that they can sort of create that healthy balance. But it's really important for you as the caretaker and the caregiver to be aware of these as well. And so let's take a look at what that digital landscape looks like for children today, where they're spending most of their time, why they're spending so much time in these virtual spaces. There's of course absolutely no shortage of apps and platforms really for any of us, but especially for young people to dedicate their time and attention to. We've done an exploration of what this looked like in 2025 through one of our reports. It's called Lost in the Scroll. We do this every year. At the beginning of every year, we release the data from the previous year in terms of where young people were spending their time, how their parents felt about this, what their parents did about this as well, and what were some of the sort of key issues that families encountered online. And so, of course, one key category here is definitely social media. One thing to note is that in our reports, we differentiate social media from video, from communication tools. And so YouTube and Snapchat are not ones that I mentioned further down, but that's because they were in their own categories, and they did top their own categories there in terms of popularity, of course, which is not going to be a surprise to any of you. But what are really the key reasons why young people flock to these platforms? Again, what are some of the benefits that they get from them? Why are these places so important to them? Of course, on a higher level, this is where young people communicate. Communication here is incredibly important, almost impossible without these platforms. It's a way for them to express themselves. It's a way for them to really gain and share information as well. When we look below the surface, what we see is that these are the places where young people learn, find out, discover about some of the most important things happening to them in their young teenage lives. This is where all the trends are discovered, where all the tips are shared, advice is gotten, where news is consumed, where they participate in the various fandoms that they're a part of, where they learn about fashion, where they do a lot of their shopping or get ideas for shopping. And also where they tend to sort of form and manage and maintain their friendships. What we found are the top three most popular platforms, again, probably comes as no surprise, are Instagram, Pinterest, and TikTok. TikTok really wins when it comes to the time spent on a platform. So the most time spent was on TikTok. It was about 2.5 hours for kids in the US. The times varied a little bit sort of from region to region. Instagram was most popular in terms of the app that was most opened throughout the day. So it's really interesting how we see these behavioral differences even within the individual platforms, even when they belong to the same category. Another big category, of course, is gaming, whether that's desktop gaming or mobile gaming. On the surface, of course, entertainment, passing their time really seems to be the key reason. But the sense of mastery is really important when it comes to gaming as well. And here again, when we look below the surface, we find that skill building, so again, that sense of mastery, that sense of getting better at something, is really what fuels a lot of children's desire to be gaming. It's a really important de-stressing tool as well, which is something that we often overlook. And then something that we certainly saw during the COVID pandemic was the socializing factor. It wasn't just social media anymore. It wasn't just communication platforms, messaging platforms, but really gaming environments became that really important place for children to socialize in. Again, no surprises there in terms of the most popular platforms. Roblox was definitely the top there when it came to mobile or desktop gaming, and then Minecraft and Fortnite as well when it comes to desktop in particular. We do have a new kid on the block that I'm pretty sure you would have noticed, which is various types of artificial intelligence tools. And there are three key reasons that we have uncovered, reasons why young people are flocking to these platforms and reasons why they're using them. First and foremost, of course, it's learning and education. Something like 80% of teens report that they feel it's completely fine to use these tools for homework, for learning, for education, for doing their schoolwork in general. But there are a couple of other reasons as well that are really interesting, and they're still developing. It hasn't been that long for us to observe this type of online behavior. Advice is one really, really big category, and then one you may be heard sort of more of in the news more recently, certainly over the last, I would say, 6 months, is companionship, alleviating boredom, forming friendships, if you will, and relationships with AI bots and companion bots in particular. So the most popular platform there in terms of the most children using it that we found in our report was certainly ChatGPT, but more time was being spent on companion and character-based platforms. So platforms like Character.ai and ones like Polybuzz. And again, I will encourage you to go ahead and access your district's online safety hub. You will see that we have some pieces there about AI and children's AI use in particular. Now, we also inquired as to what keeps parents up at night. What are some of the concerns and sort of the fears that they have? And this was a specific question that we asked that I would ask of you as well now as well. If you'd like to let us know in the chat, what are some of the key risks that keep you up at night, that you think about a lot, that you are perhaps most concerned about when it comes to your child using, whether it's their personal smartphone or a tablet, or going to a friend's house and using their technology, whatever the case is. But the question there was, how much of a concern to you are the following risks that your child could be exposed to through their online content? And so we obviously gave a list of about 10 to 15 of these. And I wanted to share the top insights with you there that, again, may not surprise you. And this is very much aligned with what we see in other pieces of research as well. Different types of adult content are always a big concern for parents, but then grooming tends to come up second, which is why it's so incredibly important that even though it is, like I mentioned, a very heavy, very serious topic, we want to make sure that we really talk about it, that we really have a deeper understanding for how exactly it unfolds online. And so I want to give you some practical tips here when it comes to safety and privacy on social media and gaming platforms in particular. I will be moving through these more sort of practical slides relatively quickly. But again, I will draw your attention back to the Online Safety Hub, where we have a lot of pieces that really focus on this practical and advice-based aspect of you parenting in the age of technology. So let's look at some of the don'ts. Again, some of these are going to be very, very basic to you, and you're probably doing these already. Number one is to really be involved, and especially very early on, to not have social media or gaming just be something that you sort of hand off to your child and then don't really think about again, or don't really talk about again, or don't bring up again. You'll see later on that I mentioned here checking in on a regular basis. So it's that circular moment of we kind of start exploring these platforms, then we come back and talk about them. We explore them some more, and then we come back and we talk about them. And it's really this kind of cyclical experience as your child sort of grows and develops through their teenage years. Creating a shared profile to begin with is really, really helpful when your child comes up and says they want to try out a gaming platform, a social media platform, so that you can really become more familiar and more comfortable with these online spaces. A lot of these platforms now do have their own inbuilt native parental controls. TikTok, for example, has family pairing. We always recommend that if your child is on any of these platforms, that you do use these parental controls, but also some of those third-party parental controls like Custodio, which your district, of course, is making available to you. You'll hear me repeat this again, learning how to block and report, whether it's users, individual users, accounts, whether it's specific content. This is thankfully a relatively easy thing to learn how to do nowadays. If you go into any of the platforms your child is using, TikTok, it can be X, it can be Discord, it can be WhatsApp, really any platform, you'll find sections that will teach you how to block and how to report different types of, again, activity and users online as well. As I mentioned, checking in on a regular basis, having regular conversations about what's going on, and also really trusting your gut and encouraging your child to trust theirs. This can really be part of those ongoing conversations. When do we feel, and the kids like to say kind of cringe when the ick factor is high. What are those moments in those online interactions where when things feel off, they feel a little bit weird, we don't really feel comfortable with a certain person who's maybe reached out to us? It could be somebody the child already knows. It could be a complete stranger. Really keeping those conversations going on a regular basis to really keep that fresh and top of mind, both for you and for your child. And then a few really key sort of basic don'ts, especially when it comes to opening up social media account, but a gaming account or profile as well. We typically recommend to not use your child's full name or their real birth date to set up the profile. Their whole birth date, the birth year, the actual year is very important because most of these platforms will differentiate your child's experience and their privacy settings based on the year that they were born. So we don't want them to put in the wrong birth year, but we don't need them putting in all the rest of that highly personal information. For the same reason, we don't want to give social media access or permission to our contacts. We want to manually choose who, if you will, we surround ourselves with online. And then again, any kind of personal information through direct messages, especially with people who your child doesn't know in real life. These things are a big no. Now, we're talking a lot about age. What do we mean when we say age-appropriate technology use? Another question that we asked our parents in the report that we released earlier this year is, what age do you think is appropriate for children to start using social media? Again, if you would like, I'd invite you to let us know in the chat how you feel about this question, what you kind of think is the right answer to this question. In our report, we did find that an overwhelming majority of kids were on social media sort of between the ages of 11 to 14. What an overwhelming majority of the parents who we asked said was somewhere between 16 to 18. So almost 60% of parents said this, which was interesting and a little bit of a surprise. It's a really high number. And this was parents in the US who felt that this was the sort of the ideal age, the age that they would choose. And the reason that I want to highlight this with you is because parents feel a huge amount of pressure to allow their child to get on these platforms probably much, much earlier than they would actually like to. And I think that's a really important thing to sort of bring to the surface, to shed light on, and to really talk about this pressure that parents feel to do that. And then to really also support parents in being able to delay usage as much as they feel is appropriate. And again, when we talk about appropriateness, I want to define really what we mean by that in a much more holistic way. It's a little bit misleading to say age appropriateness because we are talking about age. So age is important. That is sort of our starting point. But what we're also talking about are these different elements that you will really know best as your child's caregiver. So your child's personality, what is their maturity level? You might have a child who is 6 years old and you might have a child who is 8, and you might find that your 6-year-old in some ways is actually more mature than your 8-year-old, right? So that can vary a lot and you will know best what your child's maturity level is. Then finally, another really important factor is any unique circumstances. that are special either to your family or to your child. So this can be things like learning differences. This can be things like any kind of diagnosis of anything from, say, dyslexia, generalized anxiety disorder, any kind of special needs that your child has, right? Any of these types of circumstances that really mean, when we say that one size doesn't fit all, when we're talking about appropriate ages, when we're talking about how children use social media or gaming platforms, it's not always going to look the same for every single child. And so these are some of the things we mean when we say age appropriate. So we come to another sort of practical element here where I want to share with you this concept of tech readiness skills that really speak to things like device ownership, those online relationships, any kind of inappropriate content. And I want to share 6 different questions with you. These are questions that you can ask yourself in order to help yourself know when your child is ready for different types of technology. But these are also some great questions that you can share with your child that you can talk about together as a family. These are some really great conversation starters. The first one here that I like to point out, one that often gets overlooked, is whether your child is really prepared to be responsible for what is a pretty expensive piece of tech equipment. So this is when we're considering whether ownership is more appropriate at this point, or whether we really want to focus more on access. So for example, having a common tablet or having a common smartphone or dumb phone or whatever the case is in the home until your child is ready for this particular aspect of tech readiness. Does your child understand the concept of privacy, of what private versus public means? Typically, we find that, for example, children who are 4 don't yet quite understand what this means, but once they're maybe, say, 9 or 10, then they can understand and they know what we mean by private information. So what are the types of things that we only talk about within our home? What are things that we then only talk about family members? What are things that we talk about with friends? This is something you teach your child anyway, right? Even if the internet didn't exist. But then in terms of behavior as well, how do we behave in relation to this when we're frequenting these online spaces? The third question, really important when it comes to children's desire to be more independent online, is how prepared are they to handle all of those sort of downsides, if you will, once they get online, once they get on social media, once they get into group messaging, for example. How prepared are they to face and handle some of that online negativity that can happen? So how resilient are they? How good are they at creating boundaries? And then also that peer pressure element. And this is where consent is really important. And it's really important for us to talk about consent in really simple terms with our children from early on, in terms of what types of information you might feel like you want to share, and what types of information you may not want to share, even if you get asked it. And what are some of the ways we can role play so that you can learn how to say no, how to assert your right to give consent or not give consent, and then also how you can build some of those healthy boundaries. Question number 4, this is something that we ask ourselves from very early on, and we really start teaching our children self-regulating from a very early age. We really start from day 1, I would say. So how capable are they of that? And this is, again, where age and maturity level, any special circumstances will impact the answer. So how good are they at regulating their time and the way they spend their time, their behavior as well, and they're also their emotions. All of these are important when it comes to the offline world, but the online world really as well. Do they know how to adjust those privacy settings, use some of those reporting settings on platforms as well? And then finally, maybe most importantly, and of course I do say that for all of these questions, but how prepared is your child and how accepting are they of the fact that you need to be an active companion along their journey, their digital journey? So really, you being a mentor, you really being a supervisor, whether you're going to do that through something like a Custodio app, whether you're just going to do that through those frequent conversations, whether you're going to set up a tech agreement or a digital agreement with your child, whatever form that's going to come in, they need to be ready and willing for you to be that active participant, that mentor, and that supervisor. This relationship, of course, will change as they get older and they're more responsible, more mature, but you have to be involved. And the question is, are they ready for you to be involved? If they're not ready for that yet, then they're not ready to get onto these different types of technology. So third and final here, I want to now dive into, again, this slightly darker side of online safety, that riskier side of online communication, and really provide you with some sort of elemental and basic information that will help you understand how grooming happens so that then you're better prepared to really help your child and to make sure that they're more prepared to face this as well. One of the most important things to keep in mind when it comes to grooming online is that it happens in stages. It's not something that can happen within a minute or a second. It's not something that can typically happen in a day. It is a relationship that develops over time. And in some ways, this is good news because then there are lots of different sort of points of entry that we have where we can intervene and where we can help our child. So, number one, of course, starts with finding a victim and targeting that victim. One who typically appears vulnerable, appears to be unsupervised. And I'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide after this. So, some of those vulnerability factors. Next stage is really gaining that trust, posing as a friend, as somebody who admires the child, or even as a celebrity to make it more likely for the child to interact in that situation. And then really filling a need. This is where that psychological element of this process really comes in. So providing lots of emotional support, providing lots of compliments, providing gifts as well. So one of the most common things we see is gift purchases within gaming platforms, Uber Eats vouchers, Starbucks gift cards, and things like that in order to really fill that need. And then moving really into trying to isolate the child in this relationship, discrediting whatever support circle they might have, friends or family, and really discouraging that contact to make sure that the child is really mostly interacting with them. This is then when the sort of darker side again starts to sort of set in, where the relationship moves into this next phase of becoming more sexualized by exploiting something that is really developmentally completely normal and natural for that child. So their curiosity, their desire to learn, their desire to explore, which again is developmentally completely appropriate. But this is really being exploited, taken advantage of. And this is typically where the groomer will really initiate this by sending adult material in order to then get the child to essentially return the favor as well. And then this is where we move into that phase of just really trying to maintain this relationship and maintain control by either confusing the child or using threats. So this is where we see things like sextortion potentially happen, and then really also demanding secrecy. So again, discouraging contact with anybody else in order to kind of keep that relationship isolated and alone online in virtual spaces. There are certain vulnerabilities that make a child sort of more exposed to this type of risk, certain characteristics and patterns. These are psychological on the one hand and then behavioral on the other hand. When it comes to some of these psychological vulnerabilities, it's things like low self-esteem, poor body image, and feelings of being misunderstood. What is sort of tied up in that is that feeling of not belonging, of being different, of potentially not being accepted, not being understood. And this really is a sweet spot for anybody trying to take advantage of a child, because this is where they can really easily fill in those needs that children have that they feel, at least subjectively, are really not being met elsewhere in their more sort of trusted, again, offline relationships. In terms of some of the online behaviors that we see that make children more vulnerable, one of the main ones that I always try to get across to parents is lots of late night device use alone in their room. So it's incredibly important that you have an awareness of that, because that really leads us to that next point, which is limited online parental supervision. And the next one, in fact, so posting suggestive images on social media or other different types of content using, say, vulgar language. These are all of the different sort of signs to a groomer that this child is not being supervised, or not being supervised entirely, or not being supervised late at night. So it suggests that they are more vulnerable, and there's a greater opportunity there to establish that kind of a relationship. Related to posting online, also expressing vulnerability in different types of public spaces or group forums as well. So talking about some of those unmet needs, some of those issues with things like poor body image, for example, or not feeling understood. So these are some of the vulnerabilities that are really important to keep in mind, because again, as families, as parents, as caregivers, you're in that really unique position to really intervene very, very early on before a risky relationship is really even established, to have conversations with your child about some of these themes, to really observe your child and how they're behaving and see if they might have some issues, some of these struggles really, and then try to help them, try to support them, try to build that emotional resilience, and then also by extension, make sure that their interactions online are a lot safer. So I wanted to show you a couple of different sort of pathways through which grooming can happen, and this type of behavior can really unfold online. Different sort of pathways that lead to what's referred to as a platform shift. That is, that really important moment happens at around sort of that third or fourth stage of grooming, when that person will suggest to the child, let's move from a public, a sort of open platform onto a private platform. And it can be private messaging, it can be voice chat. It takes a few different forms, but I wanted to show you what this happens, or how this happens rather, through a few different sort of virtual spaces online. The first one is social media. So shifting from social media into private messaging platform. This might start off with a message like, hey, we have a bunch of mutuals, so mutual friends, connections. Do you go to a certain school, a certain area, a certain mall, a certain shop, a certain club, whatever the case is. So the discovery here really happens in that public space through different posts, using different hashtags for different themes online, or these mutual followers. And the shift there into private messaging will happen as this person is giving the child a lot of attention, a lot of validation, and also starting to build that secrecy and suggesting that we move into either direct messages on a social media platform, or a more private virtual space like WhatsApp messaging, for example. And really the keys here in this type of relationship and down this pathway are really lots of complementing and identifying some of the vulnerabilities that the child has in order to establish this relationship. When it comes to online gaming and moving into shifting platforms into those more private spaces, it could start off with something like, great game. Do you play this a lot, or have you just started? And the discovery here will really happen through gameplay, through collaboration, through playing together. Another question might be, do you usually play games at this hour? I'm around if you need someone to play with. And then as we shift into those more private virtual spaces, what the groomer will typically do is offer lots of support, again, lots of understanding, lots of really feeling special and feeling quite unique, and might suggest that you move into a private server on Discord, or move into voice chat, and really building a lot of that familiarity, being very friendly, incorporating a lot of really fun and lightheartedness, because after all, this type of relationship started within an online gaming platform. And so it's very much reflective of that. Third and final here, these types of relationships might start on a very public forum. So we're talking about a very public space where there might be hundreds, even thousands of different people there gathered around a common theme, a favorite book, a favorite show, a favorite musician, so on. And so the conversation might start with, you seem like you really get this topic. Most people don't. And so the discovery here is happening through some of these shared interests. Again, we have a lot of complementing here as we move into, well, let's speak privately, let's speak more one-on-one, offering lots of encouragement, lots of helpful advice, lots of unique understanding there as well. And again, there might be a suggestion to move into direct messaging, into an app like WhatsApp, or even Signal that is very, very private. Encrypted messaging, of course. But the key here really is to offer lots of validation, to offer mentorship, really make the child feel like they are, again, unique, special, intelligent. And I have to say that when it comes to this one, I think this is something that we can really all fall victim to, not necessarily in a grooming or a predatory type of relationship, but if we think about various types of scams that happen online, even to adults, this is often one of the ways in which it happens. We are only human after all, and really one of the best ways to establish contact with another human is to flatter them, is to make them feel like they understand something that other people don't, or that they're special in some kind of way. So I think it's important to keep that in mind if we do find out that our child has gotten caught up in a relationship like this, to really feel a lot of compassion for that, to feel a lot of understanding for the psychological process that really happens in the background of all of this. So, as we slowly wrap up, I want to give you one more sort of element of practicality here, ways in which you can support your child's online safety that really sort of reaffirm and highlight a lot of the tips that I've already shared with you. One really important thing to also keep in mind is that this too is a process. This is not something that you'll just sort of say once or have one conversation and then it will be fine, and your child would have learned what they need to learn. It is really an ongoing process. It's, as I've mentioned, a part of the relationship that you have and that you build with your child anyway. So the first thing is to really show interest in the platforms that they're frequenting. Trying to do that as early on as possible, of course, is fantastic. It's never too late to start doing that, though, to becoming more involved, to showing them that you are curious, that you're interested, that you want to know where they're spending that time. Not because they're going to get into trouble, but because you are genuinely curious and you really want to know how they're spending their time, what kinds of interests they have online, what kinds of relationships they have. This one I will say is the absolute most important when it comes to any type of online safety risk, whether we're talking about bullying, we're talking about grooming or sexting, violence online, really anything negative that can happen to our child. It's incredibly important that they know that they can always, and I do mean literally always, no matter what happens, come either to you, or if they're not comfortable coming to you, having at least two or three other trusted adults that they can come to for help. This is one of the biggest barriers that we see when it comes to helping children with negative online incidents, is that they don't feel comfortable, they don't feel safe, they're too scared to come to us because they're worried that they will immediately get punished. We won't take the time to listen. We won't actually take the time to help. We're just going to take the device away, uninstall the app, or do other similar things. So it's very important that they know that they really can come to you at any time for any reason, even if they've sent a nude picture of themselves, which they know they're not supposed to do, they're not allowed to do. It is not a good idea to do it. They can still come to you and you can be the person to help them really figure out the situation, get in touch with the school, do whatever needs to be done to really help resolve it as soon as possible. If you do find out that a worst case scenario like that has happened, it's incredibly important to stay calm, which of course you already know. And of course, you already know that it's incredibly difficult to do that. It's really important in order to maintain trust with your child. And again, to make it likely that if something happens, they will actually come to you for help. If you do find out that your child has been contacted by a stranger online, you find out they have a new online friend, do try to find out more. Again, approach it from a place of curiosity and not something that your child will get into trouble for, but really try to find out a little bit more, ask a few questions, learn a little bit more if you do find out that something like that has happened. Periodically check on the privacy settings they have set up on any of the chat functions that they have enabled in gaming platforms in particular. So again, it's really that ongoing process. Have lots of conversations and agree on some basic rules around making new friends online. These rules will of course change, right? They won't be the same for when your child is 6 as compared to when they're 8 and when they're 10 and 13 and 14 and 15. This will change as they become more responsible and more mature, but make sure that there's always an understanding as they grow throughout all of these different developmental stages of what these rules actually are, and why rules are there in the first place. Because what you also want to discuss is what those healthy versus risky relationships look like online. And those are the reasons then, of course, that we then have the rules that we have in our family. Finally, and I alluded to this earlier when I was talking about some of those vulnerabilities, really make sure that you create some of those boundaries around when and where your child is using their device. Some of you may have seen the show that was aired on Netflix called Adolescence, that came out of the UK. It was essentially a four-part series that looked very much like a documentary, but it was actually a if you want, a dramatic representation or showcase of one of the sort of negative outcomes of a child using technology late at night and alone without really any parental supervision. And one of the, if you've seen the show, this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, so I apologize. In the very last episode, one of the things that sort of moved me the most was a statement that I think the father made when he said, or the mother may have said this, but They said, he was in his room at night. I thought he was perfectly safe because he was in his bedroom. He was in our home. What possibly could have happened? What was the worst that could have happened? I didn't think anything bad could happen. But of course, their child was exposed to a lot of negative influences that then led to a lot of negative behavior. And I don't want to reveal the rest in case you haven't seen it yet. But that was one really important sort of message for me in that show that I hope parents kind of took away, which is creating those boundaries around when and where a child uses their device, because this can really be a vulnerability for them as they explore these online spaces. And again, remember, we want to try and create that balance between them really reaping the benefits of all of these amazing technologies they have access to, while also making sure that they don't fall into some of those risky traps. The thing I want to wrap up with here is a question that we sometimes get in terms of speaking to younger children about predatory behavior, about grooming. Those aren't words we necessarily want to use with, say, our 4 or 5-year-old, but it is really important that we talk about this, and probably younger and earlier than we would ideally like. In another report that we published a couple of years ago, where we spoke to our partner schools, not just in the U.S. But around the world, we asked a question around sort of the ages around which schools detect that their students are either possessing or sharing nudes. In the US, we had almost 70% of the schools that we asked say that they have found this to be the case. So students between those relatively young ages of 11 to 13 sharing this kind of or possessing this kind of content, in the schools then having to intervene and do what they do best when it comes to managing students' online safety. We can talk about this topic without, again, having to use these very big, sort of serious and grown-up words. Some of the concepts and topics to focus on are things like, again, consent. We have to say yes or no when somebody asks us to share something. We can't say no. Saying no is an option. We also have to keep in mind the fact that other people need to give us consent as well before we share or ask for their personal information too. So here we're talking about the privacy of information. Again, that concept of privacy is so incredibly important online, whether we're talking about text messages and the things that we type out, whether we're talking about video and the types of things that we record, whether we talk about the photos that we take, the screenshots that we take on our personal devices and then share on. And then again, going back to those healthy relationships online. So creating those healthy boundaries, both with known and with unknown persons online. When your child is younger, they might only be interacting with school friends, and we might think, well, that's okay. What's the worst that can happen? This is where, for example, in group messaging, we often see that some pretty bad instances of bullying can happen, even with very young children, because they're put into that very, very unique virtual environment when there's very little to no adult supervision. And then sometimes we see even very young kids behaving in ways that we wouldn't expect them to behave until they're really a lot older. So there can be sort of tricky situations, even with kids who your child knows, let alone with strangers, as they grow to be older, more responsible, and you become more comfortable with them encountering strangers online. Those healthy boundaries are still going to exist regardless, and it's really important that we talk to those with our kids, talk about those with our kids on a regular basis. Okay, so with that, I'm going to wrap up. We did go a little bit over time, which is always very easy for me to do when it comes to these topics. I do want to draw your attention again to your district's online safety hub, where you'll see we have lots of different pieces on this topic specifically, and many, many others. But we have guides, we have articles, we have advice for you in video format as well. So if you don't have a lot of time to read a full article, you can also just take a couple of minutes to watch a video about, for example, predatory behavior online, or how groomers like to give kids gifts in order to really gain their attention and gain their trust as well. So this is the QR code again that you can use to access your online safety hub. I really encourage you to go in there, and you'll see there's a way that you can reach out and contact us through the online safety hub. So if you do have any questions or you need any additional resources, then I would invite you to reach out and to let us know about that. All right, fantastic. So I'm going to wrap up there. Seth, I'll invite you to share a few just a few thoughts with us here as we wrap up. If you have any comments or questions as well, or really anything else that you'd like to share with the families watching us today.
Well, thank you, Theodore. I really do appreciate it. Mount Vernon families, I see this as a continuation point. I see this as maybe a jumping off point for some of us. I'm a parent just like you, and I'd like to think as, director of technology, I'm plugged into all these things and I know how to manage and block and all that stuff. But the reality is that technology moves so quickly, and even I can't seem to keep up, and I've made mistakes. But there was a slide that she put on there, the one of the last ones, and one of the ones that was most encouraging to me that I've always practiced was knowing what platforms my students or my kids use, and just becoming familiar with those can go a long way. And then double checking privacy settings and reassuring that the platform didn't change certain things. I have a Roblox story of Roblox was really trying, I think, to do the right thing and brought in the AI facial recognition to confirm if it was a child or an adult, and it inadvertently aged up one of my children and removed all parental controls. So just a real lesson on staying on top of things as much as you can. We are here, the tech department, Mount Vernon as a whole, to support you as well in this journey. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, you can reach me. You can find me in the directory. I'd be happy to help you get Custodio set up or answer any questions you might have from either another parent's lens or from the district perspective. So again, thank you for being here. Theodore, thank you very much for your time today.
Absolutely, Seth. Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing up that example of Roblox. It can sometimes be something that happens in the background that we're not even aware of. That, as you said, is coming from a good place, a place of actually wanting to make a particular virtual environment safer. Inadvertently, it can make it less safe for kids. So really, really glad that you kind of highlighted that as a really important thing for parents to do. We had a question about the recording being made available. It absolutely will be. We recorded this session. I'll be sharing that with Seth, and then Seth will be sharing it with your whole community through all the channels that you have available to you for that. So with that, we're going to finally wrap up. Thank you so much to all of you who joined us live, who stayed with us from the very start to the very finish. I hope you found this session helpful and useful. Again, please do check out your district's online safety hub. Check out the information about Custodio, the parental control and digital well-being tool there. Activate it, set up the account if you haven't done that just yet. Again, please reach out to Seth if you have any questions. Reach out to us through your online safety hub. Yeah, if you have any questions, need any additional resources, please do let us know. Thanks, everyone. Bye.